Hello, everybody, and thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Up in the Air. I'm Hunter Williams.
And I'm Casey LaHecka. This week we'll be joined by the Weather Risk Management Club, who is here to talk about Hurricane Patricia and the recent flooding in Texas.
That's right, we'll also have a special feature on Arctic sea ice, and of course Amanda will be by later with a look at your climate outlook.
We'll have all that and much more coming up, but first here's Update in the Air. The Greenland ice sheet, one of the biggest and fastest melting chunks of ice on Earth, will drive up sea levels in the coming decades. The full melting of Greenland's ice sheet could increase sea levels by about 20 feet. Brandon Overstreet, a doctoral candidate in hydrology at the University of Wyoming, is heading a team with 6 other researchers to understand the effects of the warming on the rivers. Although it can be very beneficial to sit at their computer desk and analyze the models and data they have, this kind of information can only come from empirical measurements in the field. Their research could yield valuable information to help scientists figure out how rapidly sea levels will rise in the 21st century, and thus how people in coastal areas from New York to Bangladesh could plan for the change.
With a strong El Nino in the forecast for this winter, it is important to realize that these events impact a whole lot more than just temperatures and have impacts spanning from forest fires to fishing trends. And with all of this in mind, it is also important to take a step back and think about how we keep track of El Nino conditions. To approach this daunting task, NASA utilizes a fleet of Earth-observing satellites. The newest of these satellites is Jason-2, which was launched in 2008. Jason-2 is capable of monitoring sea surface height, as well as many other variables that measure how the oceans store heat. NASA uses data from satellites to create computer modeling systems, which help us analyze El Nino.
Hurricane Patricia, the most powerful hurricane ever recorded in the Western Hemisphere, hit the Pacific coast of Mexico Friday evening. Patricia exploded from a tropical storm on Wednesday evening to a Category 5 hurricane within 24 hours. Though it had been downgraded to a tropical depression by Saturday morning, Patricia's intensification was one of the most dramatic of any hurricane, cyclone, or typhoon on record. The highest wind peak reached in the hurricane was 202 miles per hour. Patricia packed sustained winds of 165 miles per hour when it hit southwestern Mexico at 6:15 p.m. local time. By early Saturday morning, its winds had weakened to about 75 miles per hour. The next strongest hurricane in the Western Hemisphere since records have been taken was during the 1980 Hurricane Allen, which sustained winds of 190 miles per hour.
Earlier this month, the U.S. cargo ship called the El Faro sank off the Bahamas during Hurricane Joaquin. Satellite phone recordings are now providing additional insight into exactly what happened on board the vessel. According to a release by the National Transportation Safety Board, the captain of the cargo ship reported a hull breach. The recordings also indicated that the ship lost its main propulsion unit and that crew members could not get it to restart. The El Faro went missing on October 1st with 33 crew members, most of whom were American. According to electronic alert data, the last known position of the ship was about 20 miles from the edge of the eye of Hurricane Joaquin. It is estimated that the ship was experiencing sustained winds of up to 121 miles per hour and seas of up to 30 feet.
Marine scientists have warned that the future may bring more harmful algal blooms that threaten wildlife and the economy, and called for changes in research priorities to better forecast these long-term trends. Empirical observation suggests cause for grave concern. Northward expansion of phytoplankton species, wider seasonal windows for harmful algal blooms development, and an increasing prevalence of harmful algal blooms worldwide all indicate a future with greater problems. The impacts of algal blooms are extensive. Although phytoplankton blooms normally fuel productive ecosystems, some blooms create very low oxygen concentrations in bottom waters, killing or driving out marine fish or benthic organisms. We'll be back in a moment with more. Once again, we have members of the Weather Risk Management Club, Barbara and Jonathan, here to talk about Hurricane Patricia. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us, guys. It's always great to be here.
Now that remnants of Hurricane Patricia have left Texas, how much rain did Texas end up getting?
Texas has suffered most of the year under the worst levels of drought on the U.S. Drought Monitor. The majority of Eastern Texas has been experiencing at least a severe drought, with some parts an extreme drought and an exceptional drought. So the rain from Patricia was needed, but not so much so fast. A local ABC station, WWAY, stated that Corsicana, which is about 50 miles south of Dallas, recorded over 20 inches of rain since Thursday. From the same article, Houston broke its daily rainfall record with 5.53 inches, surpassing a 2.13 inches record. Brownsville also broke its rainfall record with 2.31 inches Saturday. Many other cities set rainfall record amounts Saturday that resulted in flash flooding.
That was a lot of rain. What impacts did the rain have on the communities affected?
There were multiple evacuations in the flash flood zones in southeast Texas, especially near Galveston. While around Austin and surrounding areas, heavy rain closed 66 low water crossings, making traveling a nightmare. Also, the rain forced the closure of Interstate 45, the main artery between Dallas and Houston, causing many traffic delays. A 55-car freight train south of Dallas derailed due to flash flooding. With all the flooding and damage, thankfully there was no casualties.
Flash flooding was the catalyst of the damages in Texas. What are some of the dangers of flash flooding?
Driving on roads that have standing water is very dangerous. Only 12 inches of flowing water is needed to sweep away a small car. In a CNN article on the Texas flooding states that most flooding deaths are in small cars. In the same article, it tells the story of a homeless man in San Antonio, Texas, who tried to save his dog from a drainage ditch, but he was swept away. The dog has been found safe, however, the man has yet to be found. Driving in floodwaters is never safe. Remember, turn around, don't drown.
Financially, how did Patricia affect Texas and Mexico?
Multiple estimates show a projected loss of $3 billion in damages for Texas, while in Mexico, damages are projected to total $2 billion and $500 million is only insured in Mexico. The storm damage could have been worse if the storm's path was 20 to 30 miles in either direction. The storm bisected Puerto Vallarta and Manzanillo, two of the bigger cities in Mexico, west coast, while also staying south of Mexico's second largest city of Guadalajara. To help put minds at ease, Verizon Wireless allowed free calling and texting for U.S. citizens to contact loved ones in Mexico during the storm, and this is effective until Friday.
Thanks for having us. Next week, 2 more members will join you on the show.
Welcome back to the show.
We now have a special feature about Arctic sea ice. Enjoy.
Did you know it's possible that increased warming and decreased sea ice cover in the Arctic could be responsible for the Arctic outbreaks and major snowstorms we've seen over the past few years? Since 1980, Arctic sea ice levels have been decreasing, reaching a record minimum in 2007 and again in 2012. Over the last 30 years, the Arctic has warmed at least twice as rapidly as most lower latitude locations. Researchers are now discovering the atmospheric circulation for an Earth with a robust and consistent Arctic sea ice cover is noticeably different than that of an Earth with much less ice cover, similar to what we are seeing today. 20th century records of the Atlantic Ocean indicate that periods of warming in the North Atlantic are tied to stronger northward movement of heat into the area through the Gulf Stream, with the past few decades indicating the strongest warming at any time in the past 2,000 years. Similar trends have been observed in the Pacific. One consequence of this warming is reduced north-south temperature gradients that weaken the circumpolar winds that act to isolate the Arctic from the rest of the northern hemisphere. Also, overall warming of the atmosphere means that winds traveling north are warmer and wetter than they have been and push the Arctic Oscillation and North Atlantic Oscillation into more negative states. This has allowed for weaker westerlies and a more meandering north-south flow, allowing warm air to travel farther north and Arctic air to plunge south. This more wavy flow also allows storm systems to stay over regions for longer periods of time. While mounting evidence for this theory continues to pile up, the jury is still out as to whether there is a true connection between Arctic warming and mid-latitude weather. For Up in the Air, I'm Andrea Paparelli.
Thanks for tuning back in.
Amanda is now standing by at the climate wall with a look at your 8 to 14-day climate outlook. Amanda?
Thanks, Hunter and Casey. The last couple of days have been a little bit chilly, a little bit windy as that system moved through earlier on this week. And with that, some of the foliage has actually passed peak color here in central Pennsylvania. Any of the areas marked in brown have passed peak color. Those areas in red, so back towards the western Pennsylvania and a little bit further southeast, you're actually in peak color right now, so going into Halloween looks to be very beautiful outside. And down even further towards the southeast, towards Harrisburg, Philadelphia area, you have still yet to reach peak color. So again, that's something to look forward to as we begin going towards November. Looking at, similarly, the leaf drop amounts as of the other day, near any areas marked in orange, relatively high drop rates, so those trees becoming more and more bare over the next couple of days. Areas in that yellow are a little bit slower, but will pick up as we begin moving into November. So a little bit of the climatology for this time of year. Our average high here in State College around 58 degrees. Our average low has dipped below 40 degrees at 59, and those records do date back to around 1896. So our average precipitation here in State College for the month of October around 3 inches, with about 0.4 of that being in snow or ice. As October will wrap up in the next couple of days next week, we'll have how much rain we actually got throughout the month of October, so look forward to that. Looking at the current snow depth across the U.S., not much to speak of towards the east, but back towards the west, towards Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana, towards the Rockies. They've actually gotten some pretty significant snowfall over the last couple of weeks, and so they're beginning to build that snowpack. You can see that bullseye right around Denver. 0.9% U.S. coverage for snow, and we're just going to see that number continue to rise as we go further into the winter season. So looking forward to the pattern over the next week or so. Keep an eye on this bubble of cooler air as it pushes its way southward towards parts of Michigan and parts of extreme northern Ohio, and it will begin to impact our weather as we begin going into Halloween. But again, nothing major to worry about. Looking at the Climate Prediction Center's outlook for the temperatures over the next 8 to 10 days, so that beginning of November, look at this big pocket of what they're expecting to be very warm, very above average temperatures. So our climatology in the upper 50s. So we're expected to push up into the 60s for the beginning of next week. While back towards the west, temperatures are actually expected to be below normal. So that looks to be a little bit of relief for those in the west dealing with some of that drought and those wildfires. Looking at the precipitation outlook, pocket of that below normal precipitation expected in the extreme northeastern parts of the U.S. But again, as we push back towards the west, down towards Texas, where they've already seen significant amounts of rain, is expected to have above normal precipitation for the beginning of November. And even further west, back where they've had so much of that drought in the northwest and the western parts of the U.S., are expected to have below normal precipitation amounts. We talked about some of that drought back towards the west and mostly in California, that extreme drought, but pushing towards our area, not looking to be very much of a drought for us. So I'm going to send it back to the desk. Hunter and Casey.
Thanks, Amanda.
And that's all we have for this week's episode.
Thanks as always for joining us.
We'll be back next week with another episode.
But for now, I'm Casey LaHecka.
And I'm Hunter Williams. We'll see you next time up in the air.